Yeah, we're good.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay.
Well, we could just keep talking to get started. I'm going to have to start though with a plug
Sure.
for one of my advertisers, JB Evans.
Right.
I take any opportunity to wear a suit when I have an excuse to wear a suit.
Sure.
And they're good friends of mine over there. And they dress you up well. So I just want to say that's who dressed me today. It's a tiger suit that I'm wearing. Yeah, if you got a wedding or anything coming up, they're the people you want to see to look good. So, without further ado, I want to thank you, Dr. Rawana, for being here. I really appreciate your time. I want to start off with an introduction, maybe with some of your credentials I have here. So, you're the director of the Center of Education for Research and Positive Youth Development. It's a mouthful at the Lakead University.
Right.
You're also the professor there at the Department of Psychology. Right. And the Northern Ontario School of Medicine.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Right.
And you also do consulting work with the Public and Catholic School Board as well as St. Joseph's Care Group?
Well, mainly with the public board.
Mainly with the public board.
The others are more intermittent kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
I kind of thought that. I remember when we talked on the phone, you said you loosely did some work with them.
Yeah.
So just to get some background knowledge on you, because I want to get to know you on a personal level a little bit more, how and why did you come to psychology, and why did you pick that as your field of focus? Because I imagine there's a long trajectory with picking psychology, because you didn't take just getting a master's and stop there. You went all the way to your PhD, and now you're director and you're a professor.
Right.
Why psychology?
Well, my first degree was an honors degree in physiology at the University of Western Ontario.
Okay.
And my intent was to be a researcher and my work was actually looking at the reproductive system in animals to see what models would be applicable in terms of understanding human reproduction. Mm-hmm. And I did a master's in physiology.
Oh, wow.
And realized in the process of doing it that lab work is really not my calling. Mm-hmm. And that I'm sort of more interested in the mind than the body per se. Mm-hmm. And then, so with that in mind, I actually went to Waterloo and did an honors degree in psychology.
Okay.
And found my niche.
Nice.
And that led to a master's in psychology at Waterloo, and then a PhD.
Wow, so that's a lot of years of schooling.
So it's a lot of years of schooling.
Yeah.
But it was good to have the biological background, because that helps you to really understand how the brain works. Mm-hmm. And what's the relationship between the brain and behavior. And so it was a nice combination. It turned out well.
Out of curiosity, how come the reproductive system? What was your interest in that, out of curiosity?
Actually, the interest was not so much unique to me, but it was, I happened to have a supervisor, a professor in physiology, who was very, he was very interested in the system. And I felt, okay, let me just grab onto him. You can learn a lot from someone who has a lot of knowledge. Mm-hmm. And that's how I got into it.
Kind of backboned off of him. Was there an intrinsic event that happened, or was there an insight that you had this aha moment where you said, no, I want to be working with the mind more so than the body? Yeah,
well, actually working in the lab, it's pretty much just lab work. Mm-hmm. And in the process, I realized that I'm more interested in working with people and working with the psychology of people. Mm-hmm. And it took a big step, because I was moving from one field to the next. Mm-hmm. And I had to go back and get an honors degree in psychology in order to be eligible to apply to the graduate program in clinical psychology. Mm. So it was a big step.
Yeah, it's a big leap of faith to go in one direction. It's not an opposite direction, but kind of...
It's interrelated.
It's a branch off, essentially, right?
Yeah.
Well, I'm happy you did that branch off, because I think that's what we have in common, is a love for psychology and the human mind and people in general. Yes. And that's why I was excited to have you here, because for the people who don't know, you often consult with the St. Joseph Care Group, and you come into clinical meetings with the Sister Margaret Smith youth program that I work at. Right. And it's an inpatient program for youth and teens struggling with drug addiction. Right. And you often present usually always present your strength-based theory model and how that applies to affecting change and motivation in youth and teens. And I just eat it up. I just want to absorb it when you speak. And, your time is limited, and you're usually there for an hour or so in the meeting. And every time I've seen you speak, I I know you're a busy man, but I wish there was a chance to get to speak more. Okay. So that was almost the development, a little bit of the podcast, having these types of experiences with people like you, and just saying, I want to hear more of what that person has to say. So I think your knowledge and area expertise is very applicable to the people of Thunder Bay, not just in parenting, not just in programs like I just described, the Sister Margaret Smith Youth Program, but also in the school and educational programs. So I just want to dive right into your area of expertise, which is the strength-based model. Or am I saying that correctly? Strength-based theory? Or
a strength-based framework.
Strength-based framework. Yes, I researched online, and I've been YouTubing it the last 2 weeks, and there are always a little bit of different names of it: strength-based theory, strength-based model, strength-based practice. But I imagine they're all encompassing the same philosophy.
Absolutely.
So, what I would want to get to in this next section is describe what strength-based theory is, how you came to adopt this theory. What was intrinsic in making you adopt this theory as your methodology of practice, and how is it implemented? How does it affect change? So I guess to start at the top of that is, what is strength-based theory?
Right. So with any theory, the first place to start is what's the definition of strengths? Because there are lots of definitions out there, and of course we're talking about psychological strengths as opposed to physical strengths. So took us quite a few years actually to come up with a definition, because the definition then determines how you want to translate that into an action plan. So the definition of strengths is that strengths are what we call competencies and characteristics that are valued by the individual, that reside within the individual. These are internal strengths, and that it's part of their cultural milieu.
I noticed too, in my reading of it and reading your work that you sent to me, it's not only what they find valuable, it's what others find valuable as well, right?
Within them.
Yes.
Right. So if someone, let's say if one of the strengths of an individual in terms of their ability to be a leader, and they may not be fully aware that they have that strength, but someone else who observes them, it really comes to their attention very quickly. That this person has what it takes to be a good leader, so why not try to nurture that? So it's the distinction between competencies and characteristics is that a competency is a skill.
Okay.
So a skill might be that you're good at cooking.
Okay.
You worked on it over time, you developed it. Whereas a characteristic is more like a personality characteristic. So that's like having a good sense of humor.
Yes.
So that's why we included in the definition both competencies and characteristics.
Okay.
But there's an interesting twist to it, which is not generally seen in most definitions of strengths, and that is, a strength is only a strength if you value it.
So you yourself value it. So give me an example then of maybe someone who has a strength and they don't value it.
Right. So it happens quite a bit in the school system, where a teacher might tell a student, you're a very bright student. But I don't see you using your intelligence to do the things you need to get done. So the teacher does see it to some degree, but the student, for whatever reason, doesn't feel that that's part and parcel of who they are. So the strategy that I would encourage a teacher to use is to help the student to appreciate their intelligence, to experience it. So for example, if the student is really good at math, maybe they can do some personal work with him or her to sort of show that level of intelligence. And if you experience it, then you start to own it. And once you start to own it, then it becomes a real strength. So that's part of how we deal with it in terms of when we try to translate it into encouraging people to develop their strengths, is to actually wear them.
I found teachers have done that really well with me, being a student support person in the classroom. Though maybe a kid doesn't see their strength in math because everyone is doing math generally at their level, but they're decently competent. But they'll send them maybe with me and that student to do a special task. Where he said, wow, I got picked out of that whole group to go and do that task, whatever it may be at the office with calculating something. And you just see the difference in that youth's face, where they finally feel like, wow, I'm special because I have that ability. I'm not just a part of the pack.
That's right. So that's what that's
so that defines a strength, characteristics, and a competency.
That's right. So that's a distinction,
Okay.
and encouraging people to value it.
Okay.
That's been an important part of the intervention plan. So, for the Smith Center, for example, as you know, when the clients come into the program, they have an SAI done, the Strength Assessment Inventory done, and that way they begin to have some appreciation of their strengths in different domains of functioning, like leisure, family, peer relationship, those kinds of domains. Because as you imagine, when people come into a residential treatment program, they generally come in with a lot of negative views about who they are and what they're all about. And that's a message that's been given to them a lot.
Kind of a rock bottom for most people.
Right. So what we find very often is their statement about, you know what, Dr. Rawana, no one has ever asked me what my strengths are. It's like and they begin to then start to see themselves in a slightly different light. It's one of the things that I'm very interested in, particularly with adolescents, is identity development.
That's a big one. And I know Ron Knutski.
Right.
He does a program and it captures the youth. And with reading your research, I went, that's strength-based theory.
Yeah.
It's identity, belonging, competence, and purpose. Like that's all he preaches to the kids.
Totally,
those 4 things.
It's totally the same thing.
Yeah.
We're just languaging it differently.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, your identity, for example, would be something like a question I might want to ask you, Mark, is when you put on your hat when you in the residential program, when you go as a staff, what are the top 2 strengths you bring to that role?
Well, top 2 strengths, if you're asking that, that's interesting. Now I'm in the hot seat. No, I like that though. That's great. My top 2 strengths is I find my work vocational, so I don't just look at it like I'm going to work to get a paycheck.
Right.
So I bring to it, I think, a level of, I don't know what the word is, substance that I'm really trying to bring to the table.
Right.
And 2, what we're doing right now, I like talking, and generally when you're in a birdcage, as the youth call it sometimes, you're in not a locked facility, but you're in a an enclosement. You need to be able to talk and communicate with people. That's your best level of engaging with them. So I'd say those are my 2 best strengths. Right.
So then the identity issue would be more in terms of, you don't have to answer this, but just to think about it, is out of those top 2 strengths, which one do you value the most becomes part of your identity as a staff at the Smith Center. So it's a practical concept, because generally when we talk about identity to a kid or to an adolescent, it sounds a bit abstract. But what we try to do in our strength-based work is to give it a level of substance. So a question might be, when you as a brother in your family, what are the top 2 strengths you bring to the family as a brother? So
I love these questions. Keep going, because I'm learning it by you telling me.
But that's how you get to the concept of identity.
So say my identity, back to that example, like you said, with working at the Sister Margaret Smith. If I look at my work as, I'm not just doing a job, I look at it vocational. So my identity would be kind of, I don't know what the words to put that, it would be not a worker plus almost. Yeah. So you're there to provide some help. And you love it. And so if you know that, then you can nurture it to get better. That's the whole idea behind strength-based work. You see the value in it, like you were relating before, and there's a shared value. And people acknowledge it, and you feel good when you express it. Why would it not grow? And identity is that. In reading your research, though, identity is tricky for even me to grasp, because it has like the 7 domains that I read in your research. Like there's various domains that your identity is built in. Right. So the domains, then, what we can do when you when you complete the strength assessment inventory, you can actually identify what are the top 2 items in that domain that you seem to be expressing a lot of. And then the question would be, out of those top 2, which one do you value the most in that domain? So if let's say if it's peer relationship,
and your top two strengths are, say, leadership and building trust. Out of those two, which one do you value the most becomes your identity as a friend. That's a practical thing, and you can share that with a person and say, you know what, you may not have known that. And if you feel if that resonates with you, then it gives you a chance to sort of say, okay, maybe when I'm with friends again, maybe I will show that quality. Because it seems to be something in very sort of important to who I am as a person. So we try to bring identity into the concept of making it real. Similarly, we try to bring strengths into a concept that makes it real for people, so that they can see that it has value. So, and the thing is, if your identity is based on all the things that you're generally good about, and you value those things, you will have a positive identity.
Yeah.
And if you have a positive identity, you may have a more favorable self-esteem. And the probability of having a better outcome in your life increases if you feel like you're moving in a pathway that you value. It uses your strengths, you're using it to address some of your challenges. Isn't that what we want people to do?
I almost like think of a metaphor like a garden a little bit. That's what I see in my mind. I think very metaphorically, and if you think your garden is just, it's nothing, it's not even a garden, then weeds grow, right? And negative things exacerbate. But then if you say, no, that's a flower garden, you kind of water the flowers, then you want to start plucking the weeds almost. How for a relatable example, because that's something I'm really working on with this podcast, and making it really applicable to the common person in Thunder Bay. So the general person in listening or in the city often is a parent. I have a stepdaughter of 11 years old in my life, and she's a piece of cake, but a lot of people have children that they struggle sometimes with evolving their child. So how would strength-based theory, how would it be practical with, say, as a parent?
So it starts out in infancy.
Okay.
So maybe the first question would be, what exactly is parenting?
Yeah, that is a good question. Well, I would be more than happy for you to answer that.
Very quickly,
what is parenting?
Very quickly. Parenting is being given the opportunity to help a person develop the qualities that will help them to be productive human beings in the world, however that is defined. So you have to then think about, as a parent, what are some of the things that kids experience, let's say as a 2-year-old, that will help them to sort of navigate some of the challenges in a positive way. So one of the things that we know for 2-year-olds is what we call the terrible twos. Emotional management, right? So as a parent, you have to be a little bit thoughtful and vigilant about, how is my child managing their emotions when things are not going their way? What do?
They tantrum.
And when they tantrum, this will be one option. Then you want to know, when they're experiencing the same thing, when do they not tantrum? Because what they're doing is that they develop a different set of behaviors. Yeah,
you often see that. Maybe a practical example I see, I didn't have my stepdaughter only from about 6 years old on. She's been in my life. But you'll see a 2-year-old who hears no in one environment, but then say in Walmart hears no at the checkout aisle and has a meltdown, right?
Yes, right.
Is that what you're kind of alluding to?
Right. Okay. So then you can maybe have a really down-to-earth conversation with the child about, sometimes you seem to be able to manage this better. So how can we help you to manage it? What can we do together? So you start to build the strengths from a 2-year-old. So emotional management would be something you want to nurture. Another one would be dealing with other people, dealing with peers. Right? If a peer takes something from you, what are some ways where you can try to navigate and negotiate how to get it back, as opposed to hitting the child or something? So the point I want to make is that every time a parent sees a child doing something, they can take a little bit of time to figure out, what is it this child needs to learn that they're not showing consistently, that I can then help them to develop. So parenting is hard. That's the point I want to get across. It's not a piece of cake.
No. Especially when there's two involved and one has a different perspective of ideology of what that child needs to learn, and the other has a totally different ideology, whether it's depending on their backgrounds or the way they're raised. I can imagine, right?
And the other thing I like to suggest to parents with kids under the age of 4 is to think a little bit about when they're in school, what are some of the things that they need to do? Well, they need to be respectful. They need to listen when people are talking. So I have 4 years to teach them those skills. So why not start to practice those things? Anticipating what are the challenges. When they're 12 years old, what challenges are they likely to encounter? Do they have the skills? That's what parenting. So parenting is nurturing the skills to be much more functional as you get older.
Have you found, and with that being said, have you noticed the implementation of technology severely hindering child's development?
Absolutely, and that's a big concern that's coming out in the psychological literature right now, which is that the technology is taking on a life of its own, and it's all consuming. So it's hard to get the kids to think beyond what's available to them via technology. So how do we go outside and have some fun that does not involve technology? So my rule of thumb is, and not just my rule of thumb, but the American Academy of Pediatrics came out with some position papers recently, not too long ago, that under the age of 3, kids should have like about a half hour of screen time per day.
And we both know they're probably getting a lot more than
that. And the reason is that the screens and the technology is so reinforcing that it grabs the kid's interest.
Now, what does that mean, reinforcing exactly?
Reinforcing means that it's self-stimulatory.
Gotcha. They see the iPad,
the
joy comes, the serotonin flows every time.
And they can do a whole bunch of things with it. So why would they want to drop that and go play soccer outside?
Especially when that has a level of skills and competencies that they need to develop, like falling and hurting, and then it's, I don't want to play soccer again because I tripped and I fell and it hurt.
And how do you experience disappointment? And so one of the concerns we have about technology to some degree is where do kids learn to do the other things that don't involve technology, and help them to be a broader, like a much more all-rounded individual. So you have to balance it off. That's my message to parents. You have to sometimes put the technology away, like have an hour in the evening where there's no technology in the house. And do you want to do that? And if so, what will you do instead?
Yes. It's more work. It's more work, though. I find in the long run.
Yeah,
they're going to have a more adaptable child than the one that's been conditioned to use an iPad.
Yeah.
So
sometimes technology becomes babysitting.
Yes.
Is that the right thing?
It's unfortunate, but it's generally the society, and that's a topic for later. I want to get into not because I didn't want to veer too far from strength-based, but the sociological effects of just single parenting in the home and what that's had on youth and children and teens. But so strength-based theory, I want to stay on that topic. So you said it's primary, you want to start focusing from 0 to 4, but I imagine it's something that follows as a methodology of parenting all throughout children's development.
It's throughout the lifespan, right? So we've been doing a lot of strength-based work in the school systems in Thunder Bay.
How so?
Well, so it's a strength-based training with the public board, the Catholic board, the French board. And the intention is to do a school-wide intervention so that every child starting in JK to grade 8, if that's in the elementary system, sometimes up to grade 6. So what the teacher is doing is that they're sort of encouraging the kids from very early on to recognize what their strengths are. So let's say if in a JK, the kids hear the message that one of the things you're really good at is helping other kids. And if that gets transferred into SK and into grade 1, by the time the kid is in grade 3, they will be a big helper.
To be a peer leader for the younger children.
Yeah. So we have some strategies, like we have the strength assessment inventory that I think
that goes into the school board as well.
It's to the school system. So what we do is, so we have 9 domains.
Okay, so the research you sent me said it had 7 domains. There's 2 more in the SAI, the Strength Assessment Inventory.
There's 9, and then there's 2 more that makes it. We use a supplementary.
Okay.
For for kids dating and those kinds of things.
So could you highlight for some people what those domains would be?
So the domains are, so the thing is like family. Family, what are some strengths as a member of the family? What are some strengths you bring to that domain? There's peer relationship. There is leisure, right? There is strengths in knowing yourself. Like what sort of insight do you have about yourself, right? There is strengths in community engagement. There is strengths in keeping clean and healthy. So we have a whole bunch of domains, strengths in school. So the intention is to make sure that every domain that a child is likely to encounter from the time they get up in the morning, the time they go to bed, has potential strengths in it.
I understand. So they can kind of pick one from all those.
Yeah.
Say their home is in disarray,
Yeah.
but they are the leader for their little sister. They keep her safe. They take her outside to the park and that.
Exactly.
But and all else, the hygiene, the cleanliness in the home, or whatever, can be chaos. But
Yes.
That would be a strength they could pull out of that.
Absolutely.
Gotcha.
Right.
Is this? I was curious when reading the research once again. Was it influential? And I did case management for Trinzate at a time, and I know I worked in child welfare group homes as well, and I worked with Sister Margaret Smith. Plans of cares, they seem to adopt this model. Like these domains match exactly word for word almost, family relationships, identity, leisure and play, and you have to hit all those areas. Was the strength-based philosophy influential in all these different organizations, say Creighton, say Tronzade, say Delico?
We have all done similar kind of work.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's just an overarching, everyone kind of grasps the same
because
factor.
it makes sense, right? And these are the domains that kids are having their struggles in. So we also acknowledge you have some challenges, but you also have some strengths. So the idea is to then use your strengths to deal with your challenges.
And that's an interesting perspective. I was curious to pick your brain on more so how what that looks like, because I have a theory of that. So say I'm a good athlete and I can go on the soccer field and I can score every game. How do I take my sense of being a good athlete as, say, now having to do math or doing a school presentation or a speech or I don't know, whatever, pick any domain, being a family. How would I counter transfer that ability into those other domains? How is that done?
Yeah, you know what, Mark, that's a good question, and it's fundamental to the work that we do. So for example, if I were to take the one that you're giving where I'm a good athlete, I want to break that down. So what makes you a good athlete? So one of the things that might make you a good athlete is that you listened well to your coach. So your teacher is a coach, right? So they're trying to teach you something.
Yes.
Another quality that you probably bring to the athleticism is the fact that you enjoy the skills that you're learning. So one of the skills might be concentration. You're learning how to concentrate on the moment. So if you're doing it well in that, let's see what exactly that you're doing that you can bring it into the math. So you're breaking down what you're good at into the sub-skills. And then the sub-skills, you can copy, let's say 5 of them. Can now practice these now in pretending that, you're applying this to math now.
But what did the motivators be? And that's a key word in the research is motivation,
Right. Right.
And see, I'll use myself example because I don't know any of the. I'm motivated to jump over that bar higher.
Yes.
I don't know why. I see the challenge and I love the challenge.
Right.
So, let's say you said the discipline of the sport, but say a math equation where the bar is set high on that math equation. I don't see any motivation. I don't I don't intrinsically know what's that inside of me that doesn't like.
I think you have a good point there. I think the way that I would want to chip away at that is to first give you a math that you can actually do and be successful in.
Oh, that's a good point.
And once you experience success, that's what it's all about, right? If you experience success, then you can, oh, I can actually do this. And then you up the ante a little bit more.
Interesting.
So the always way to work with kids when they're having some struggles academically is to start with what they can do, and then expand it to what they cannot do.
I think that's a key point. That elastic band, not pulling it. I think of those balloons that are really hard to blow up. You know, the ones they make animals with. You try to blow in that thing as hard as possible, but you stretch it over time, and then it works.
Right. So you see, that goes back to the definition of strength. Remember, we say it's building competencies.
Competencies and characteristics.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
Yeah, and if you think about it that way, then you start to provide an opportunity for kids to develop. So I've said this many times in the workshops that I do, and that is any interaction with a child has 3 outcomes.
Okay.
1, it's helpful. If it's helpful, do more of it. 2, it's harmful. And if it's harmful, well, stop doing it. And the third outcome is that it has no impact. If it has no impact, why are you doing it? So think about interacting with kids from that perspective, is that there's only 3 outcomes.
I learned that in therapy. Have you ever heard of therapeutic crisis intervention? TCIT training?
Yeah, it's the same.
It's called firefighters. Either you're firefighting,
right.
or you're growing, or you're
or
deflating the person.
Absolutely, it's the same concept.
Interesting. But I like that cross counter transferability. That's not a real word there, I just said. But anyways, so it's picking apart those sub skills, like you said. I think that's very important there. I'm just trying to reiterate that to grasp that in my mind for the work I do, because you might see an athlete and you say, holy man, like maybe some people say, oh, they're just gifted physically, and well, no, that person can focus. You know, a golfer, you enjoy golf, some people can't golf for the life of them because they hit it once and it's terrible, but you probably love the concentration of that, because that's counter transferable to the research and work you do.
So recognizing the sub skills would be the thing to do, and then helping kids to appreciate, did you know that this is what you are actually doing to be a good athlete? Like, you get up in the morning at 6 o'clock. Right? So if you get up in the morning at 6 o'clock and you get there on time, well, let's figure out what is it that you're doing maybe to get up in the morning and get to school on time. It's the same concept. So you're trying to encourage kids to transfer the sub skills into a different domain.
So and then the kind of third part of that question was, how do we implement these? And I know you touched on the SAI, and I'm not trying to toot my horn as a worker, but I get obsessive the way I think about things, you know, with a kid. And many people do, and not just me. There's a million great workers in this field. And I go home and I think and I think and I think, and I tease out, okay, they did that great, and they maybe struggled this in a day. But how for someone, say, coming new into the field, what things can we put in place that can make those obvious for those people to look for and to learn? You know what I mean? Because it's a pretty abstract concept. You know what I mean? Picking out a subset of skills in a youth in one domain, and then counter transferring it to another part of their treatment, say, or their parenting. Or so I'm just wondering, how is there any more ways that we can practically find those? Like is there any technical ways of doing that?
I think one of the qualities of being a good service provider is that you spend some time observing what you're doing, and trying to sort of see. So this is what the person is doing, and some reflections on why do you think the person is doing that? Because there's always a reason, and if you start to drill down a little bit beyond the obvious, then you start to take on more of an observational role. And so, for example, if you're looking at a youth interacting with another youth, you can start to begin to see, so what are they doing well? Are they listening well? Do they spend a lot of time talking? You start to begin to get the fundamentals of what it is that provides a good interaction versus a bad interaction. And then you can begin to have the conversation with the youth about, do you want to improve that? So these are practical kinds of things that I feel, and it gets back to competencies and characteristics. What are the competencies? So that would be a key word. Teasing those out. What can they do? And that's what I relayed to you the last time we were talking, and the counselor, you told me that and wonder why. This, I guess, would be my second two-part kind of question is,
What is it in our brain, and have you ever encountered this in your research of psychology and the human brain? Why is it so easy for us to pick out 10 terrible qualities of person?
Right.
It's so hard to find. What is that? Is that a developmental, sociological protection factor, or I don't know what that is? Why is it so easy? Why is negative so satiable and positivism? Like, I do it myself. I don't know if you ever flip open the paper and there's the thumbs up, thumbs down section. I read all the thumbs down first, and then maybe get through 3, right, positives. But is there something correlated to that, or is that just general people like to focus on negatives, or the easy?
I think part of the reason why people focus on the negatives is because it's part of how the world operates.
Part of how what operates?
How the world operates.
The world operates? Okay.
The world makes you aware of what's wrong from the time you're born.
Yes.
What's wrong with the child?
Yeah.
Why are you not breathing properly?
Mm-hmm.
So there's always a problem-solving approach to identify what needs to be fixed. I think that's how we think about it.
Mm-hmm.
So because we're sort of looking from those lens, I think that's where people start. So you go to a wedding,
mm-hmm,
you're having a great time.
Exactly.
But the meat was overcooked.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is this whole thinking about it's part of how we try to fix it so that it doesn't happen again.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's part, but it's not wired into the brain. I think it's more of a culture.
It's not wired into the brain?
It's
well,
not.
I almost wondered, you said something interesting that maybe I want to rewind to. When we were talking about competencies and characteristics and valuable, and we started on the children, and you said you want to make them productive members of society. Mm-hmm. Is that a very Western capitalistic notion, I wonder? Because shouldn't a child's main goal and objective is to be happy and fulfilled in whatever it is they're doing? Because I find that's our approach to a lot of things. Kids get raised and, oh man, they're not learning or they're not listening. They're going to be a screw up when they grow up. I don't want my kid to be a screw up. I don't want my kid to be a janitor or pick whatever sub-profession people think is negative. Not that there's anything wrong being a custodian, but you know what I mean.
I think that's a good point, and the reason why I use the word productive is that what you want to see happen is that being productive contributes to your happiness. Because those two things are not separate from each other. And I think most of us have some drive to do something. And if you have a drive to do something, then that leads to some level of productivity, however that is defined.
That's a good point. And I wasn't meaning to overtly challenge that, but you can be productive in a gang. You can sell the most drugs, and
you decide you want to do it.
You get the best identity in the world, the most negative identity from being a productive gang member. So people generally have an urge to do something.
And I think that's where you want to nurture that level, and then attach some happiness to it. Because happiness, the fundamental question is, what exactly is happiness?
That is,
Well, it's a state of mind. But it's a state of mind generally based on the fact that something good is happening in your life. And
I have a different take on that one.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I think it really relates to what we're talking about right now. I think, and I've heard this from, it's in a lot of the substance abuse literature, and I've struggled with that myself over time, and I've been told a strong lesson from some very wise people that happiness is a choice. And I think that relates back to choosing that state of mind, just like what we're talking about, choosing what you're going to look for.
Yes.
You're choosing always to say, oh, my kid's a brat. Oh, they never go to bed on time. Oh, they have so many behavioral issues. You're choosing to look at those. So it's really what I wonder if it's what we're choosing to look at often.
I think it's partly a choice. However, we know that temperamentally, some folks have what we call an easy temperament. And an easy temperament is when, things are hunky-dory, you just go with the flow. But then if you have a difficult temperament, things tend to be a little bit more challenging. And then the third level is what we call slow to warm up. So temperament is biological.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So
how explain that to me? I don't understand that.
well, so temperament or qualities of temperament are things like mood.
Okay.
Some kids are quite moody, right? Temperament would be something like hyperactivity. Temperament might be some.
Okay.
It's those kinds of is being easily frustrated. Emotional regulation. Those are temperamental qualities that if you see in a child very early on, we tend to break it down into 3 categories. And you may see a child on Westford on the street, for example, and the child is smiling, and you pretty much come to the conclusion that's an easy temperament child. They tend to look at the world from a much more positive perspective. So it's not a choice totally.
Okay, that's a good way of putting
Whereas
it.
if you have a difficult temperament, the message you're hearing all the time is something is wrong with you, you're bad, you're this and that. How is it likely to be happy when that's the message you're getting?
Okay, that's interesting. I'm glad you brought that to my attention.
Yeah.
Have you ever looked into the research? I watched this really cool. It was on the Learning Channel, I believe, but that a lot of temperament is in utero. That it's developed in utero, and they showed the juxtaposition of a mother who was a violinist in an orchestra, and a mother who was kind of a stay-at-home. She ran the house day-to-day operations, and they showed this with this one simple example. When the child was born, the violinist's child could be in a noisy environment and sleep, whereas the mom who was the stay-at-home mother couldn't. Any noise. You woke the child up, it would start screaming. So. I'd be curious. Have you ever seen that in your research?
Well, in utero has an impact, but the most what we call explanation of the variance. Temperament tends to have a very genetic component to it, so it's tied into the chromosomes. So if you have 2 parents who have a difficult temperament, you have an increased likelihood that the child is going to have a difficult temperament. So the genetic contribution is much more significant than the in utero effect. I'm pretty confident in saying that when you look at the literature on developmental psychology.
Have you in your literature encountered, and this is just total out of left field question, I'm always observant, and I noticed it in the school systems often, is the effect that diet plays on children, because I see these lunches they all get, and I'm guilty of it too, so I'm not judging any parent out there. It's easier to buy Bear Paws and granola crackers and on those things than giving a high protein and fruit and vegetable lunch. I see these kids after they eat that diet, and they can't focus half as well as they could. I don't know. Have you looked into that?
Well, we looked into that literature quite carefully too, because the diet has an impact, but again, it doesn't explain a good chunk of the variance. The reason is that the brain cells are quite resilient. They're not. If they're going to be impacted by little things in the world, how are you going to be a stable person?
Well, where I see a perfect example of what you're describing is. I'm an athlete, and I have a lot of friends who are martial artists who watch with their diet very carefully, especially when they come up to an event and they have to weight cut and whatever. But where I'm getting at that, where I think corroborates what you're saying, is my grandmother's 96 years old, and she's Ukrainian, and I think she has those Ukrainian genes. She eats, tomato soup out of a Campbell's can with ham and cheese, white bread sandwich. Probably if you were looking at it dietly, it would be probably. Yeah,
the foundation to the brain, like we have like billions and billions of neurons in the brain. It's a very sophisticated machinery. It's not going to be majorly impacted by minor changes in the environment.
Okay.
That's not how it works. Like it can't work that way. Can you imagine if it's going to be impacted by a little bit of sugar? What's going to happen?
But then there were some parents who would argue that very much, and you have children of your own.
Yeah.
You have multiple, or
we have 4 kids. They're all adults now. Yeah.
Okay, so you've seen that, so you can attest to that.
Yeah.
But some parents would argue that, and that's been an ongoing random side argument, that sugar doesn't affect temperament. A lot of people think that it does, and a lot of people think it does. They say, give your kid a scoop of ice cream, we'll see if it does.
Well, sometimes the message to the child becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy too.
Yes.
And we got to be careful about that. But by and large, I'm pretty confident in saying the literature doesn't provide a strong support for the notion that diet on its own is a contributor to a behavioral problem.
Okay. So when you're looking at a child, it sounds more influential that temperament is a key
Temperament
indicator.
is a key ingredient, and their cognitions. What are they thinking at the moment? How are they managing their emotions? How are they managing their impulses? Like, those are some of the things we need to reflect on and help children to appreciate that these are some areas you need to think about. Right?
And those were the characteristics of the personality, I think I saw in your literature,
like
right?
temperament
Those four domains: temperament, impulse control,
Yes.
emotional, and cognitions.
That's right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of work when, especially like you have 4 in there, you got to look at, and you could probably attest that too. You probably had kids all on the spectrum of temperament, and
Yes.
I came from a family of 6 children, so I definitely saw that. Even
Yeah, they're different, right?
Yes.
And you have to you can't make one to become the other. You help them to reach their level of however that gets defined. So I think the thing is helping kids not to be a clone of you, but to be the best they can be for whatever things they see as being valuable to them.
Best versions of themselves. Huh?
Yeah.
Is that almost something that would be good? I bet you parents intrinsically just know that, oh, my child is mild tempered. I can take him to the movies, and
Exactly.
he won't have, he won't blow up and have a fit.
Yeah. But it gets back to strengths, looking to see what your child is good at, looking to see what their challenges are, and helping them to use their strengths to deal with their challenges. Don't impose the solution. So for example, if a child, when he's with younger kids, he doesn't get too emotionally dysregulated. So maybe it's because when he's younger kids, he takes on a bit more of a caring role, right? So you have to try to sort of see when they're actually showing some positive qualities and helping them to acknowledge that and then grow that. Because sometimes you get overly focused on what they're not doing right, and then you say, well, you need to do this. Well, don't you think they know what they need to do? So why are you telling them this is what you need to do? How is that helpful?
Yes. I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
I found a lot of success of that in the martial arts. I think I'm trying to once again learn this from just giving an example. These kids are getting their physicality out. They're learning cooperative play. They're learning healthy boundary interactions through the martial art. Right. And then I often get from the parents, which is very rewarding for me, like, wow, their at-home behavior now has totally changed.
Absolutely.
And we didn't have to do anything. Is because it's kind of cross-transferable in that sense.
And that's where strengths become transferable across domains.
Right. Now, really bringing back to Thunder Bay, and I loosely asked you this before, and I want to get into it further. Have you noticed a significant change? You've been in this field in Thunder Bay for the past 20 years, in the educational system. Have you been affiliated with all these organizations for that same amount of time? You've had your eyes and ears to the youth and children of Thunder Bay for a long time. What have you been noticing? Have you noticed there's been a change in the overall characteristics and impulse control, emotional, those things? Has the personality of the child changed drastically, or are we generally dealing with the same things?
I think kids they're trying to understand the world that they live in, which changes dramatically every 6 months in terms of the technologies that are coming up and those kinds of things. And that's not just Thunder Bay, but that's across the board. I think that what is happening, at least in our community with the school systems, and we're recognizing that strengths are an important part of the language we need to have with kids. And I think I would say across the board in the mental health field, it's a language that's gaining some credibility. And the whole idea is, and I would say from a philosophical point of view, is that we should never have anybody think that their self-definition is the sum total of everything that's wrong with them.
That's a big chunk there. I'd have to break that down. Their self-definition is not the sum total of what we think of them. So
the sum total of a person, the way that a person conceptualizes themselves should not be the sum total of everything that's wrong with them.
Got you. Okay. People do that often.
I know.
I do a lot of good things in my day. I do a really, really lot of good things. And when I go home to bed at night, oh my God, I roll through. I watch podcasts on that alone, how to restructure my brain with a highlight reel of all the good. What is that I beat myself up?
Well, that's why that's why we're trying to introduce this whole concept that we want kids, when they go to bed at night, they reflect on, hey, I did this well. So it's a combination of what you did well and what you did not as well. That way you can start to be motivated to have some energy to do the things you need to work on a little bit more. So I think that philosophy is growing in the child development field, and it's happening in Thunderbase. So that makes me feel good. I think where the challenge is that one of the biggest risk factors for children developing behavioral concerns, unfortunately, is lack of supervision.
Yes.
Parental supervision is very important. Teacher supervision is very important, because supervision provides for the opportunity for learning to occur.
Scaffolding.
Proper learning. So one of the messages I like to encourage parents is to take your supervisory role seriously. It doesn't mean you have to do it all the time, but if the kids were adults, they wouldn't need you. And the kid mind is a very different mind than an adult mind. So provide some opportunities for their strengths to evolve, to be first noticed. Help them to appreciate that these are some challenges you also have, but let's work together on trying to address them. Don't expect institutions to fix your child.
I struggle with that one, and you know what? Before I worked in the school system, I could say I was the first person to say, the education system stomps out the creativity in the child. It's militarized, sitting in desks, regurgitating facts. It's not the way the brain. I said all those things, and now I'm being heavily part of the education system. I'm really proud of it. It accommodates in so many ways the children.
It's a very good system.
It's an amazing system. I said we live in probably one of the top 5 countries, I'd imagine, for education, of quality of care, of education, or country, or overall well-being. Yet still people are pointing the finger at the education system.
I think we all need to look to see what we are all doing together. And some of the things we need to own, we own them. And some of the things we don't need to own, we don't own them. Because a child's life experiences with any adult, regardless if you're a parent, you're a teacher, you're a coach, all of those life experiences is going to have either a harmful effect, a helpful effect, or no effect.
Back to what you're talking about.
It's 3 things you need to look at. And if it's harmful, well, you know right away. The child will let you know that it's harmful. If it's helpful, you'll obviously see some smiles and acknowledgement of, this was a good experience. And if it has no impact, well, then they don't seem to be bothered. So it's not that complicated. But if you're doing something and it seems to create some disturbances in the way the child is behaving, well, then obviously there's a relationship there. You got to take responsibility for it. Or who else would?
Yes, it's that energy. I'm a metaphorical person. I go back to this. I have multiple friends who own dog. Everyone owns a dog these days. Everyone and their mother and brother owns a dog. And you see the people who put the time and effort into their dogs. They don't jump on you. They don't jump all over the couches. They don't rip cushions up.
It's learning boundaries.
And it's boundaries difference. And it's building the strengths of what they are. They're a dog.
Absolutely.
They're not your best friend who. Well, some people treat a dog like that. It is best friend. I don't mean judgment on that, but I find that people have the best dogs or treat their dog like a dog. They take it to the park and it chases a ball for an hour because it loves running back and forth, and that's what a dog's meant to do. And a child's meant to be certain ways too. And unfortunately, that supervision just as and that's. I've been kind of formulating this wonder question in my head of why society is kind of that lack of supervision is there, and working in child welfare and seeing these children, and seeing a lot of what's going on is there seems to be a very lack, and I'm going to put it back on the men, a lack of male supervision.
Yeah.
Not that there's a lot of single fathers out there who do great jobs, but there's often a mother who's left with kids on her own.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering what is that? I'm wondering what is that in the men that they're not getting what they need to be responsible in the child's life.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's too judgmentally focused or too targeted, but I you notice that in the most marginalized people, it's the father's name is rarely attached to a child in care. Because he's usually absent, or the sole responsibility is placed on the mother. And I don't know. I'm wondering what that is with men in society where there's that lack.
I think that's historical. That's historical. It's cultural, and doesn't mean that they have to be that way. Mm-hmm. I would like to see that early on, like even during the period of pregnancy, that men take a little bit more of an active role. Prenatal classes, like we have opportunities for these things to happen. Mm-hmm. Learn a little bit, like read some of the materials about child in utero, those kinds. I think the culture has to support it. The society has to support the involvement from the time of conception.
So what you say that's kind of cultural? You think it's more cultural based that the men aren't there? Like what has supported that in the past?
Yeah, I think partly is because, like when we look at historical in our society, for example, there was no paternity leave for men. Now it's starting to happen. Mm-hmm. So if there's no paternity leave, what's the message to the man? Mm-hmm. That I'm peripheral to this whole thing. Mm-hmm. But there's maternity leave. Right, so society has to sort of take a step back, and if they want to create equality, they have to make sure that the standards and the expectations apply to both. Mm-hmm. Those messages, I think, are very important.
Mm-hmm. I found that's something I find interesting, that equality factor, and don't get me wrong, I might take some flack for saying this, but I find the men's issues get very undermined. How much trauma and abuse and difficulties boys and men go through, but that they're never highlighted as much, I find.
Well, it's the old story, right? Men are not supposed to show their emotions. Mm-hmm. They're supposed to be more sort of related to outcomes and strong pillars of society and those sides of things. Mm-hmm. So again, I think that's where the equalization of the sexes is an important thing to sort of try to grow over a period of, and it might take decades for that to happen.
So now you're I don't know what the word is, the Center for Education and Research of Positive Youth Development. Mm-hmm. How did that come about, and what exactly do you guys do there?
Yeah, so the center historically was it was part of 5 centers that was supported by the federal government. Okay. Way back, maybe about 15 years ago, and they were trying to create centers of excellence for children, focusing on different aspects of child development
through research and
through dissemination of knowledge and working with the communities and those sorts of things. So we started out with working with exceptional children.
Interesting.
As a center. So exceptional, depending on however exceptional was defined.
Exceptional as a positive, like, because exceptional can be
exceptional more so in terms of what the challenges were.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I see. When I saw it exceptional, I thought they can, do math calculations in their head.
I was more looking at it from more of a deficit perspective.
Okay.
So then I was fortunate enough as a professor in the Department of Psychology to be offered the position of director as the center was evolving at Lakehead University. And when I became the director, there was enough flexibility in the center to allow for it to develop the way based on what our interests were in research and clinical work and those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. And that's where we became much more strengths-oriented. And that's how it has evolved over the past maybe decade or so. Mm. So we at some point we collaborated with the university administration and changed the name to the Center of Education and Research on Positive Youth Development.
It's so cool. I've been in this field for so long, and I did not know that there was a whole center federally funded.
Yeah.
Now,
but now this was federally funded, no longer.
That's what I was going to go to next.
It's not
with all the
federally
cutbacks and social welfare.
The funding from the federal government stopped quite many years ago. So
once the center was already developed, or
once the center, I hate to say this, but when the Conservative government came on board, they cut all the funding for all of these 5 centers.
Oh wow!
Yeah, because it was formulated in the Liberal government time, and I don't know if there's a relationship there, but in any case, the funding was stopped, and the centers were then put in a position to survive on your own, or you no longer exist.
So how did they get to allocate those funds? They had to just do charity or fundraising?
We got through grants and contracts and that facilitate strength-based work. So that's how, so we're totally self-funding.
Wow. That's cool.
Totally self-funding. Yeah.
Very cool. So do you guys have anything interesting that you're researching at the current moment or working on or developing? Like you mentioned workshops before. Yeah. You mentioned,
Right. So we have graduate students who are working with us. So right now we have someone doing a master's thesis where we're looking at strengths-based work with the university population of students, and to see is there a relationship between strengths and wellness. So we have developed a tool, for example, to measure strengths in post-secondary students. And so we're trying to use that as a way to figure out if you have certain strengths, does that equate to being a more functional student? What's the relationship to mental illness in the undergraduate population? So we are expanding some of the strength-based work that we have done with adolescents into the adult world.
Now, excuse me, going back to correlating that to something we were talking about before, was that focus of that research developed through noticing a deficiency? Like, was there a large populace of people, say, taking undergraduate programs and dropping out?
Well, we're finding out. If you look at the literature across North America, actually, there is a higher prevalence rate of mental challenges in university students now than they were 10 years ago. So, and I think it's related to the stresses that students are experiencing. Financial stresses for grades, and the stresses, of course, contribute to some level of ill feeling. And so we find that's becoming more of an issue on the campuses these days.
Stress?
Yeah.
An overbearing amount of stress in students?
And students having some struggles and seeking some counseling. So we're trying to understand that, and what relationship does that have to their intrinsic strengths. So we're approaching it from a positive perspective. So that's part of the research that we're currently doing.
Interesting.
Yeah, we're looking at.
And you're a part of that, or your postgraduate students are?
Well, I supervise my students. And Bob here, so we all work together as a team.
That's very cool. Now, do you notice? I wonder. You can look at that in a lot of different ways. If you ever wondered, for a time we've never had more, opportunities for students, with loans and with, the quality of life that we have in Canada now versus maybe, when you went to school, I don't know how many years ago that was.
Right.
But have you noticed, what would you think is the difference, out of your own personal perspective, why the students are struggling so much now?
I think one of the unfortunate developments is that sometimes students come in with the perspective that I'm entitled to have an A. Not realizing that you got to put the work into it to get an A. So there's a level of entitlement, and then realizing that it doesn't come that easy. You got to put some work into it. So maybe we haven't developed that work ethic as strong as we used to. When I, for example, was at the university, you realize that everything that you do, you earn it. So I feel like it's and when because you come to a perspective of this is relatively easy, I can do this. When you realize you cannot, you got to work into it. Then the stresses start to multiply.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say one of the things we need to do in the adolescent years is to encourage adolescents to develop strategies to deal with stress. Like, stress with friends, stress with finances, stress with day-to-day challenges in life.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's through working through those stresses that you develop resiliencies.
Mm-hmm.
So when something happens in the university, you're away from home, there are lots of other things happening. Do you have the internal resources to tap into that and say, you know what, I need to take a step back and figure this one out?
Mm-hmm. I had a good teacher in my last year of child and youth worker. His name was Barry Caswell.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to name drop him, but he said it's very easy, this child and youth work stuff that we do. He said it comes down to one word, and that word can be broken up into two words to make it easier to understand responsibility, the ability to respond.
Yeah.
And people look at responsibility, oh, that person's irresponsible, and it has such a negative connotation towards it, but it really isn't. It's just it's your ability to respond to a stressful situation that approaches it to you.
Absolutely.
Some people see a problem and they stress level goes to 10, and then they avoid schoolwork, I imagine, and
then you
bury their head in the sand, maybe go drink some drugs or take some alcohol,
and it doesn't go away, right? And I think unfortunately too, I think parents these days are given the message that try to make your child's life as stress-free as possible.
Yes. I'm glad we're back on that with the parenting, because I want to touch on that a little bit. You hear about that a lot now, and I don't really see this in my household too much, but you see this a lot with other parents is don't be their friend, be their parent. You hear that buzzword going around a lot. Why? I wonder why that is, because I'm of this demographic that was raised from the baby boomers.
Right.
They were my parents were very responsible, but our generation now is a little bit more buddy-buddy with the children.
I think what's going on is that the things that we do together are not age differentiated anymore. So you can do games on the computer together. Mm-hmm. So it's not like one is an adult and one is a child now. It becomes almost intertwined.
Interesting.
So that sort of demarcation between this is a child activity and plus is an adult activity is less clear. The boundaries are less clear. Mm-hmm. And I think as a result, is a 10-year-old feeling like a 10-year-old or feeling like an 18-year-old? Mm-hmm. I think that's where, again, parents need to be sort of helping the 10-year-old become an 11-year-old as opposed to an 18-year-old.
That's an interesting. I was just having this topic with my partner, and I was wondering about that. The lunch supervisor who runs a great meal program in the school. I was teaching my stepdaughter a lesson, and she came in and intervened, and she says, "Whoa, don't put big thoughts in little minds." I was teaching. She was running the breakfast program, and I was teaching her about responsibility, and she says, "Cut that out. She's doing fine."
Yeah.
But part of me wonders what you just said. Should I be? A child's mind is so malleable and open and like a sponge, and if you don't give any restrictions, they can do backflips off this table. Like their athleticism, their mind can learn things. So where is it that cusp where you're kind of giving them too much, but not?
I think a good question to see is when I'm talking to them, are they interested? If they're interested, then it shows that they want to sort of take in what you're offering. So it's engagement is what we call, before someone is willing to listen to you, the person has to be engaged with you. And there are 3 levels of engagement from the literature. The one is what we call a behavioral engagement, is where when you're talking, they're actually giving you their attention. If they're not giving you their attention, then they're not even engaged. But then the other one is what we call emotional engagement, is when they not only listen to you, but they like you. You have developed a relationship, a rapport of some kind. But that's not the final thing. The final thing is what we call cognitive engagement, is when they actually listen to you, they like you, they like what you're saying, and now they're prepared to put it into action. That takes work.
There's a lot of work that goes into that.
So that's what as adults, I think we need to help kids to feel cognitively engaged with us as the parents and emotionally engaged. And that you got to work on the relationship, right?
I heard an interesting point about relationships. Maybe it'd be helpful to people out there, because I know everyone who has a partner struggles with that, but they say whenever you want to engage with a partner, say about a challenging, never sit face to face with them. Go sit beside them.
Yeah.
Because they'll feel like it's a mutual kind of thing you're bringing up between the relationship, almost in that engagement, like you're saying.
The engagement is important, and working on it. And if you're disengaged from your child, unfortunately, sometimes that happens, and somebody has to fix it.
So now, could you counter-transfer those to, say, a relationship? Because everyone struggles in the relationships, and approaching that strength-based theory.
Well, the thing is that this is it. Strength is almost like positive energy. If you bring strengths to a relationship, and it's mutually evident, it's going to be a positive relationship. If you bring weaknesses to the relationship, it's not going to be a positive relationship. So you got to reflect on a little bit about, in this relationship, what are some of the strengths I bring to it? Have a conversation about that. And what are some of the challenges that you think I bring to this? And if you trust each other, you might be able to figure this one out a little bit more. And most relationships that are strong and healthy, you see a lot of strengths in them that both people bring to it. So it's interesting how strengths facilitate engagement. In fact, one of the measures we use in the school system is a student engagement questionnaire.
Student engagement questionnaire.
To see
Elaborate on that for me.
It's a bunch of questions that we ask kids about to find out how engaged are they with the school culture.
Gotcha. Well, it's funny you mentioned that. I went digging for the SAI once again, and I couldn't find it at the center today. But there was another document, and it was similar to that. It was just what was their experience like in the treatment? What was their connection like to staff? What was their connection like to the other youth?
And we're looking at engagement. So engagement is a big part, and I think, in a very simplistic way, if a family members are engaged nicely with each other, it's going to be a well-functioning family. If you're not nicely engaged with each other, it's going to be a bit of a challenge. And then what's contributing either way to that? Like, it's not rocket science, but I think it's important to look carefully and taking on a parenting role in a serious way.
Engagement. So I want to reiterate those, because I think those are important. Are they paying attention? Are they emoting? Are they connecting with you in a positive manner? Are they smiling?
And are they willing to work towards
common goals? Are they willing to put the actions into plan? Now, maybe this will be the last thing I'll touch upon on the whole strength-based theory, and because I'm kind of curious, because it's so valuable, is it something that could be applied to a relationship? Because it often seems like there's differentiation in roles when teaching strength-based. It's psychologist and teacher and student. There's a hierarchy of structure, right? When you're trying to teach someone less developed almost. But would that be almost patronizing to say to try to apply this to a partnership and a relationship?
I think it's totally around relationships. Because it's not a one-upmanship, right? It's a conversation about, in a partnership, are we behaviorally engaged? Do we love to be with each other? Are we emotionally engaged, and are we willing to work together towards some common goals? Right? It's the same thing. And if you put your strengths into each one of those questions, you will find that invariably it's going to be a much more enjoyable relationship. Because it generates a lot more positivity and a sense of feeling grounded and so in the school systems, what we've been working hard to try to foster is encouraging teachers to work from a position of their strengths.
Of the teacher's own individual strengths?
Yeah.
Okay.
And for the students to work from their strengths perspective. And if you have two people working from a position of their strengths, you're likely to have a positive end result.
I know, back to those teachers beating themselves up, because I see that in school, because I'm in multiple classrooms. Some classrooms might have run a tighter ship.
Yes.
And the teacher feels pride in that. But I still hear negatives, their insecurities, I guess. And then you have a teacher whose class is maybe has a little more buzz to it, and they go, "Oh, my class shouldn't be this chaotic." But I go, "No, like you connect with those kids." So I see the kids leaving like smiling, like don't beat yourself up. And it's back to our human characteristics. We always look to the negative, but accentuating what you bring best to the table.
Well, absolutely. So that's a big conversations we have about when you put on your teacher hat. What are the top 2 strengths you bring to that role? And reflect on it. And then the related thing, what are the top 2 liabilities you bring to that role? And do some figuring out here. Because it's a big job.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is a big job.
Well, it's the only profession in the world where you actually spend more time with a child in their waking hours than any other adult.
I went to the school system after child welfare and work in child welfare group homes. I loved it. And you make these insane really great meaningful connections, almost like a parental role. You're essentially the kid's parents most of the time, especially the way they connect to you. But being in the school, I went to that for the quality of life because it got so difficult. But I was blown away by how much time you have to relate to these kids. You're with them for 8 hours a day, every single day.
It's a long time.
I see them more than like you said. They probably see their parents.
In terms of their waking hours. So think about it, the amount of impact you could have on a child, hopefully in a positive way. And if you're working from a position of your strengths, you're more likely to generate a positive outcome.
Very good.
And helping a child to actually see their own strengths in that interaction. It takes a while, like it's not that easy. But, at the end of the day, positive energy gives you positive results.
I want to end on that because this has been very positive for me, and it's been probably, I have to say, because it's something I like and engage in, and that's why I said I was so excited to have you on here, because it's just a topic I love to talk about and love to think about and reflect on. So thank you for your time. It's been straight positive, and there was a few times in the conversation that we could have started maybe picking on people or picking on things, and I'm glad we kept it very overarchingly positive for educational purposes.
Well,
so
thank you. It was a
once
pleasure.
again, thank you very much.
Thanks for the invitation.
Awesome.